In this week's episode, Logan and I brewed up an American light lager using my 5-gallon kettle and induction burner. We wanted to show you at home how it's possible to do an all-grain batch of beer with very limited equipment. So the malt we're using today is from Palouse Pint. It's their Spokane Pilsner, which is the lightest malt they make. And from my experience with it, it has a nice, soft, creamy texture to it as well. We're also going to be using a little bit of flaked corn from Brew, and a little bit of flaked rice as well. All this together, we should be able to make a highly fermentable beer that's crisp and bright and has just enough of a creamy texture from the malt.
To start the day, we weighed out and milled all of our grains. After that, we used a 5-gallon kettle as a mash tun and mashed in our grains at a target mash temperature of 150 degrees. Next, we let that mash sit for 1 hour after giving it a thorough stir. Then, we strain the mash through a mesh bag into a separate bucket. We're going to end up using this bag to sparge out the grains with a little bit more water.
So right now I am pseudo-sparging the grain. Normally with brew in a bag batches you don't sparge, just because it's easy. But I'm gonna do this to get a little bit more efficiency. We're kind of using a janky system here, so we'll see what we can get off of this. Once this grain bed compresses a little bit more here, I'm also going to run the rest of what we did, what we just drained out there, through this grain. And the grain will act as a little bit of a filter, so that'll clarify the wort just a touch, so we don't have with as much proteins and grain particles in the boil. And then hopefully a lot of those will break out during the boil, and then again fall out even more during fermentation, so that we end up with a clear beer, even though it doesn't look like it right now.
Once we rinsed the grains with enough water to reach our pre-boil volume, we removed them from the bucket and added them over a strainer just to allow a little more wort to drain into our kettle. Finally, we brought the kettle up to a boil, and we did a 1-hour boil. We only used one hop addition, and then we allowed that kettle to go through its hour, in which we then transferred it into a fermenter, added off our top-off water, and allowed it to cool. Once our boil was complete, we then chilled our wort, took a gravity reading, and transferred it into our fermenter.
So we did the brew day together, but after everything went into the fermenter, you were the one that pretty much handled the majority of the fermentation. Tell me about what yeast you used and how you took care of that.
So the yeast was kind of interesting. I actually used an Oktoberfest blend due to the fact that I was brewing 2 beers at the time and I just happened to mispitch the yeast, which is not going to be the most common yeast strain for this style of beer, but it seemed to work out just fine.
Yeah, so it tastes very crisp, I would almost say. I think you've described it the same way. It's kind of like a light, Americanized Czech Pils kind of flavor.
Yeah, I definitely get that for some reason. I think it's a little bit of sulfur pushing through on this beer. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the hop profile adds to it, but it almost does seem to have just enough of a sort of bitterness to it to offset any other sweetness. So definitely a dry character.
And I know Czech Pilsners typically tend to be a higher mineral content lager, so it could have something to do with our water playing in there. I don't think we used any mineral additions in this beer. We didn't use gypsum, for example, that would normally push forward that hop profile, but for whatever reason it seems to come across a little bit assertive in that regard as well. So tell me, that yeast, that Oktoberfest blend, I'm used to it tasting a little bit malty sweet, sometimes fruity even, but this tastes very clean. Can you tell me about how you fermented it?
So this beer fermented at 48 degrees, thereabouts, 48-50 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 weeks. Yeah, I actually didn't do a diacetyl rist, mostly because it was finished fermenting within about 2.5 weeks, and so it essentially just sat there and lagered for probably the other week and a half before we kegged it. As of today, it's been in the keg for just about a week now.
Okay.
And as you can see, clarity is a non-issue.
Yeah, it came across really clear, and that seems almost even young for a lager. That's probably because you had kept it at such a cold temperature for so long. It's pretty amazing that it was. I mean, especially seeing what it was when it went into the fermenter. It was kind of a hazy beast at that point. So
it definitely was. Yeah, it was. It surprised me on how clear this beer actually got. So
well, that's amazing. What do you think flavor-wise you get off of the grain from this?
The only thing I can really say would be just a light sort of Pilsner grainy character. Mm-hmm. I know that the recipe did have some corn and some rice in it, but I don't know that those contribute substantially other than perhaps giving it body that makes it seem like it doesn't have that sort of watered down character that I would expect out of a beer that's only 3.2%.
Yeah, some sort of middle there. The overall flavor on this, I agree. I think it's very, very light. You don't get really an assertive graininess, but that graininess is definitely there, and I don't get that corniness that you can sometimes get depending on when you use different yeasts. Sometimes you get a little bit of corniness.
Definitely not that sort of character of, I guess, dimethyl sulfide kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Which gives you that sort of corny flavor. I mean, maybe the ever so slightest hint of it would be the only thing I could say.
Yeah, I've brewed similar recipes using an ale yeast, the German ale specifically, 1007 from Yeast or the K97 from Fermentus. Those types of yeast, and I've gotten a lot more of that corn flavor on there.
So Peter, what was the grain bill breakdown for us anyway?
In this we started with a base of 6 pounds of the Palouse Pints Pilsner malt, Spokane Pilsner. Palouse Pints, a locally sourced maltster that all our grain comes from less than an hour drive away, and then it's malted minutes away, which is really, really awesome. So we love using their stuff. That particular Pilsner malt it's very light in color, as most Pilsner malts are, all Pilsner malts are, but it tends to, for everything that I've brewed with it, give a little bit of a creamy flavor as well. So there's somewhat of a texture there that makes it not as sharp and basic as a lot of other Pilsner malts that you'll use.
Gotcha. And I've noticed that their malts, just from tasting them here in the shop as well, they seem to have what I perceive as a higher protein content, which I think might add to that creaminess.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a great resource for anyone to use, especially if it's available to them.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of fun working with all their malts. If any of you guys out there are interested in checking them out, I'll post a link to their Facebook page and their website below, so you can ask them questions about what all they offer. They have some really cool grains that you might be interested in. So yeah, one thing that I've noticed about this beer in particular, it overall came across as a very clean, light American lager, but it doesn't have a lot of that putrid flavor that I would say that I've seen from a lot of commercial examples.
Yeah, I actually noticed the same thing, in the sense that the flavor profile was incredibly clean, even at 50 degrees and being uncarbonated when I went to keg this beer. I definitely didn't get the, I guess you could call it cat piss character, which happens to so many commercial examples as they warm up. I was wondering if you might have any ideas on why that is so clean.
Well, a lot of what I attribute that to is fresh ingredients overall. They're obviously, you said they're higher protein content, maybe from using the locally sourced grain in a small scale maltster. But also very fresh grain, and the hops we use are very fresh hops. We didn't use very many of them, and we're not using the hopped extract, so we're not kind of faking it in any sense of the way here.
Okay.
Also, I think the way the yeast metabolized it probably could have had an effect as well. I don't know. I usually attribute that kind of harsh flavor that you get off of those commercial examples from, I'm guessing, just the fact that they are producing that beer so fast and using those hop extracts and kind of taking those shortcuts, I would say.
Okay. I guess that would make sense. I mean, it did ferment cold, but
yeah,
I feel like that's not always an indicator of whether or not a beer is going to be clean or not. So
yeah, and overall, I think this one came across very clean. I think at that colder temperature, that Oktoberfest lager blend is fermenting very neutral. You don't get a lot of character from the yeast itself. even some things like the 3470 strain that you can get those German lager flavors that kind of push forward.
A little bit more of that fruit character.
Right. Yeah. Even that's not there in this example.
Gotcha. So anyway, this beer is actually going to be available on our Amazon page. So we'll put a link up to there. Otherwise, you can also come into the shop and we can easily build you up this recipe.
Yeah, and we'll post it on our Facebook shop as well if you want to check us out on Facebook, or if you want to send us a message over Facebook and we can send it to you that way. Just let us know. If you have any questions on the beer that we did here, anything else, feel free to comment below or send us a message via Facebook. And like I said, we'll post a link to our Facebook page below as well.
Cheers.
Cheers.